Coming up, an unpredictable disease has the science world concerned. Cholera cases spike as the planet heats up and water resources dwindle.
It can replicate outside the human host, which means it's hard to eliminate from the environment.
Climate campaigners conduct an unusual experiment in Germany and add water and soil costs to grocery shoppers' bills.
Von dieser Aktion schlicht und ergreifend Aufmerksamkeit dafür, dass in unseren Preisen, die wir tagtäglich ausgeben für Produkte.
But first, ocean temperatures around Florida soar to unprecedented heights. Extreme readings prompt scientists to transfer coral survivors to land-based nurseries.
We're seeing coral reefs and ocean life die right in front of us.
This is Just 2 Degrees on TRT World. Meteorologists are comparing seawater off the Florida Keys in the southeastern US to a hot tub. Water temperatures have measured nearly 38 degrees Celsius for several days in a row. Experts say the hot water is having a devastating effect on the world's third largest barrier reef, with a high risk of killing off coral, fish, sea turtles and more. Non-profit groups are trying to save the coral by collecting samples from affected nurseries to keep in land-based tanks. Scientists say the coral bleaching there is some of the worst they've seen.
I mean, you could look at these temperature measurements and say, oh, we're questioning whether they're valid or not, but the proof is in the impacts. The corals are not happy with this level of hot water. They are bleaching, a lot of them are dying, I've heard too, and these hot waters extend to great depth. I've seen some measurements of 90 degrees Fahrenheit down at the level of the reefs, and that is just unimaginable heat. And here we are only in July. I mean, we've got another couple months of peak heating to go.
So we've been about a week now into an unexpected heat wave, likely due to the El Nino event that's happening this year. And in addition to having extremely high temperatures on land, we're also having really high sea temperatures. And so some of our long-term monitoring sites here off of Miami are starting to show signs of early coral bleaching. So they're starting to pale and losing their their algal pigments, and eventually we expect them to bleach fully. So right now we're in the port of Miami. So along our left side here, this is MacArthur Causeway. This is the highway that gets out to Miami Beach. You can see cruise ships lining up along the cruise terminal on the other side of MacArthur Causeway here, and then the Miami skyline here in the back. So we're deep inside the port right now. And it's generally extremely turbid, warm, water sits here for a long time, so not what we would think to be a pristine coral reef habitat. But along this stabilized shoreline here where we have riprap or large boulders, we have corals that have settled and are thriving. These corals are some of the healthiest that I have seen all over Miami, and they grow incredibly large and seem to be healthy. And so the work that we're doing and what brought us out here today is we're trying to figure out how these corals have been able to survive and whether or not we can use those same mechanisms to make them be successful as part of coral restoration. So can we take corals from the port and bring them and repopulate some of our reefs that have been decimated?
In the last 5 years that I've been studying corals, I've seen a lot of change in Miami. I feel like there's been more storms, higher temperatures and heat waves that have just caused more problems for the reef, and there's been a lot of coastal erosion that I've noticed even just in the few years that I've lived here. So I've definitely noticed a difference since I started. At the same time, I've noticed a lot of positive change in terms of projects that are going on here and funding that's supported really cool research to try to restore the reefs here.
I've lived by the ocean for the last 15 years, and so I want my family to be able to see the things that I've seen in the ocean as part of my career, and I want them to be able to enjoy them the same way that I do. And so in the last year, it's been really depressing because we've seen a lot of changes. And we've been monitoring sites off of Miami for 5 years now, and we're starting to see changes in those sites. So where we used to have coral colonies that were landmarks because they were always there and we could set our compass by them, are no longer there because of stony coral tissue loss disease and Hurricane Ian that struck last year. And so now we're starting to see a change where we're losing coral and we're starting to just turn into sponge and soft coral reefs.
I spoke with Sam Teicher, co-founder and chief reef officer at Coral Vita. That's an organization that works to restore the planet's dying and damaged reefs. Sam, we understand the waters of Florida are so hot that marine life, coral life is being affected. Just paint a picture for us in terms of exactly what's happening there. How do you see that the wildlife is being affected?
We're seeing coral reefs and ocean life die right in front of us. The unprecedented, catastrophic spikes in ocean temperatures that are taking place right now, not just in Florida, but around the Caribbean and other places around the world, are detrimental to life in the ocean, which in turn actually also has a profound impact on all of us. The simplest way I can sort of describe is if you think about a coral is actually an animal. It has plants living inside of its sort of tissue layer, which is what gives it its color, while then makes this limestone rock for its skeleton. And just like when we're getting sick, our own white blood cells start attacking our body, trying to figure out what's wrong. When the temperatures get too hot, it's almost like we're getting a fever. And the corals are trying to figure out what's wrong with them, and they kick out this algae, which through symbiosis and through photosynthesis, it's basically feeding the corals. It exposes this white limestone skeleton, and if the temperatures don't stabilize again quick enough, the corals effectively starve to death and die. And these corals not only are just, incredible organisms, but they're basically like creating the cities underwater that allow for other fish to live. They protect coastlines from storms. People are spending money to go fishing and snorkeling and scuba diving. So the corals dying is a big problem for all of us. And we're seeing many of our friends in Florida who are doing coral restoration work having entire restoration sites together with natural reefs getting wiped out in a matter of weeks. And it's unlike anything we've ever seen in sort of the time of human civilization.
Yeah, and I was also going to mention, I'm from the Caribbean. I've never really heard of this. I mean, don't take my word for it. But how normal is this as a Caribbean event? Because the Caribbean waters are pretty warm generally. How hot does it have to get there for coral to die?
Once temperatures start getting into the sort of the 90s, for folks like Americans like me who use Fahrenheit, but above 32 degrees Celsius typically, that's when it starts causing problems for corals. So this event, a coral bleaching event, it's often given in natural conditions as an analogy to like a 100-year flood. The flood's so strong, it should only happen once every 100 years. Globally, since the late 90s, we've had 6. And with the way temperatures are continuing to increase and are projected to increase, it's expected that we're going to have bleaching events like this one every other year by mid-century. Wow. So it's happened before, but nothing close to this level. And we have had bleaching as well in the Caribbean previously. My company, Coral Vita, is based in the Bahamas, having dove in Jamaica, Belize. It's happened. But again, only really since the late 90s, in many cases, or the 80s. It's the problem that has emerged in recent decades and that is getting worse and worse and worse, really every time we stick our head underwater.
Sam, do coral reefs recover even after the shells eject the mollusks inside of them? Can they come back?
They have a window to. When bleaching is taking place, it depends on the coral, it depends on how tough they are. 2, 3, maybe up to 5 or 6 weeks of warming can sort of take place. And if the temperatures drop, then they might let the algae back in and then they can recover. But if those temperatures stay too hot for too long, they effectively starve to death. And then they turn from these, beautiful, colorful, wondrous seascapes that support so much life in the ocean to, these gray rubble fields. So there's not a lot of time for conditions to get better before it's too late, which is actually right now why here in the Bahamas, we're fortunate enough to be a little bit later in this sort of spikes in ocean temperatures this year in the bleaching window. We're starting to see it come here, but it's not as bad yet as Florida. So our team is actually on the water right now, bringing in corals from the ocean to try and rescue them ahead of time. So that we can continue growing corals for reef restoration, as well as then also reintroduce some of those corals back into the reefs once the temperatures drop back down.
That sounds incredibly complicated. Like, what do coral eat? How do you recreate an ocean life for them on land? How does that work?
It's an unusual day at the office, and I definitely didn't grow up imagining I was going to be a coral farmer. But we live at a time when, just like we can plant trees for reforestation, we can plant and we need to plant corals for reef restoration. We've lost half the world's reefs since the 1970s. We're on track to lose over 90% globally by 2050. And again, this is not just an ecological tragedy, but there's estimates that reefs generate $2.7 trillion annually through tourism, coastal protection. They act like seawalls. They sustain fisheries. 1 billion people around the world depend on them. There's even medicines that are derived from coral reef organisms. So as they die, it's a problem for humanity, even if you live nowhere near a coral reef. So what we're doing is setting up aquaculture facilities. So we have tanks on land, wherein these sort of pump rooms and filtration systems that allow us to create really good water for corals to grow in. And just like you could take a cutting from a tree or a flower and grow it and then graft it, we go out into the reefs, collect pieces of coral, bring them to our farms on land, grow them for 6, 12, 24 months using these methods developed by some of our original advisors to actually grow them up to 50 times faster. So in some cases, months and years instead of decades and centuries, and actually strengthen their ability to better survive warming oceans. We can toughen them up, almost like take them to the gym in our tanks, so that when we outplant them, they've had the ability to sort of toughen themselves up against climate change. And then amidst all of that, as we do this from a good sort of standpoint from science, working with local communities, we're actually also doing this as a business to try and get customers and stakeholders like insurers, governments, hotels, to actually pay to restore the reefs they depend on, so then we can fund ecosystem scale impact.
Sam, we here on Just 2 Degrees supports your work. Thank you so much for all you do. And please touch base with us anytime you want to give us an update, all right? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you out on the reefs and we'll take care of corals together.
Great idea. We'll work on that. Thanks so much, Sam. Appreciate it.
Poverty and conflict have long been linked to cholera outbreaks, but the World Health Organization says our changing climate is aggravating a global spike in the disease. The organization reports cholera cases have quadrupled since the year 2000. The report says tropical storms and cyclones like those that hit Malawi in early 2022 didn't cause outbreaks there, as the nation typically sees it spread yearly during the wet season. But experts say that a new pattern emerged after the storms, with the outbreaks spreading during the dry season and spreading much further than before. They say mitigation efforts require a collective global response. Let's discuss this with Simon Clarke, a cellular microbiologist at the University of Reading. Hi there, doctor. It's good seeing you. Firstly, in case no one knows, how exactly do you contract cholera?
Well, cholera is caused by a bacteria that is spread by poor sanitation, so poor quality water, human effluent getting into the water supply. So really having good quality, well-functioning sanitation is key to controlling this disease.
It seems to be a very tricky one. It's already killed millions globally. What's the connection between global warming, the heating planet, and a rise in cholera cases?
Well, I think that the idea that maybe the warmer temperatures allow the pathogen to survive in the water or to grow in the water a bit better than they would otherwise, it has been discounted. I think this is down to the effect that high temperatures, droughts, things like that, and of course, movement of populations has on sanitation. And of course, if that can't function properly or if it collapses completely, then you're more likely to get spread of cholera.
From my reading, I understand that cholera also survives in soil. Does it mean that the bacteria is transferred through and into crops that we eat?
Well, that's another possibility, yes, but that's a lot less well documented than the ability of the pathogen, the bacteria, to spread via water. So yes, it can survive in the environment, but I don't think we have a great handle, a great idea of the impact of that.
From everything you've said so far, it just sounds as though combating cholera, one, and eradicating it from the planet completely really depends on access to clean water for all.
Absolutely, yes. That's the key to managing this pathogen is clean water. Until everybody has clean water and ready access to that clean water, then there will be people in this world who are at risk from picking up what is a very deadly infection.
One question about the disease itself, Doctor. It seems to be a very fine line between if you're feeling well into a quick switch into you possibly having death relating conditions. How do you know whether or not you have cholera versus whether you just have eaten something bad and you have diarrhea per se?
Really, that requires people to see a doctor if they have access to one. That's not an easy question to answer on a program like this.
Wow. All right. Doctor, it was really a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for explaining this to us.
You're welcome.
Well, and August 2nd was Overshoot Day. The occasion symbolically marks the date on which humanity has consumed all the planet can produce in 1 year without running it. And to mark the day, the World Wildlife Fund published a report on freshwater management that says a whopping 57% of freshwater consumption in France is used to irrigate 7% of agricultural land. The WWF is calling for a more equal distribution of water use there.
Overshoot Day is a quite simple concept. It means that from January 1st to Overshoot Day, which is August 2nd this year, humanity has used as much from nature as the planet can regenerate in the entire year. So we can calculate how much can be regenerated in a given country and then add it up to the world. We can also calculate it on the consumption side. We can look at how much is being consumed in each country. There are also statistics that show like how many potatoes are being consumed, how much milk is being consumed, how much meat is being consumed. And so you can total it up and say how much capacity is necessary to provide these services. Like in Italy, for example, where it takes 4 Italy to support Italy. If those countries don't shape up their economies, they'll be in a very difficult position. And you cannot change your economy from one day to the next. You need to think ahead.
The price we pay for an item at the supermarket is not its true cost. That's according to campaigners in Germany who staged an exercise to educate the public about the environmental price of producing food. During the so-called True Cost campaign, customers of this penny store, which has over 2,000 branches, were charged a price for 9 products, including yogurt, vegan schnitzel, and sausages. And the price they paid included climate, health, soil and water costs.
In den Warenpreisen enthalten sind die Komponenten, die wir als Verbraucher normalerweise nicht sehen. Das ist zum Beispiel Klima, Boden, Wasser oder auch die Gesundheitskosten, die auf den Produkten anfallen.
An sich finde ich es eine gute Idee, weil den Menschen zuhauf nicht richtig bekannt ist, was die Waren überhaupt an Wert haben, beziehungsweise was da auch an Arbeit drin steckt. Ich denke mal, viel Ware wird aus dem Ausland importiert, was an sich auch vielleicht gar nicht sein müsste, wenn die Preise dementsprechend auch hier mal angesetzt werden würden. Also ich habe an sich nichts dagegen.
Finde ich gut, man sollte es mal ausprobieren. Wie teuer das die einzelnen Produkte geworden sind, muss ich mir anschauen. Ob ich es kaufen würde, bin ich nicht sicher, kommt drauf an. Aber zur Information sollte das schon mal gezeigt werden, ja.
Also wir erhoffen uns von dieser Aktion schlicht und ergreifend Aufmerksamkeit dafür, dass in unseren Preisen, die wir tagtäglich ausgeben für Produkte, entsprechend Kosten enthalten sind, die wir so nicht sehen. Und darüber eine Diskussion anzustoßen und für breites Bewusstsein in der Bevölkerung zu sorgen.
Well, the new head of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Jim Skeer, is advising that so-called doom-monger eco-activists be ignored. He's called for a balanced approach to the climate crisis. Skeer claims some groups are paralyzing the fight against global warming since they constantly spread a message saying we're all doomed to extinction. He also adds the world won't end if it warms by more than 1.5 degrees, but it would be a more dangerous one. His comments came after activist groups Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil were heavily criticized for disrupting public peace.
One thing I think it's really important for IPCC not to do is just to send nothing but messages of gloom that can induce a sense of kind of, existential despair about the future of the planet, the future of humanity. We need to make the point that human beings do have choices that they can make, an agency over their own future. And it's very important for us to offer positive options for the actions that people can take and the decisions that policymakers can make if they choose to take us in the right direction.
Australian ocean scientists are surprised by the UN's Union for Conservation of Nature's decision to keep the Great Barrier Reef off its endangered list. UNESCO acknowledges the reef is still under serious threat and says it will reconsider its decision again in September. Meanwhile, a new report published in the scientific journal Nature found that plastic waste is reaching more of the world's reefs and damaging the delicate ecosystems. Well, Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese welcomed UNESCO's decision. He said it proves his government is working hard to reverse the effects of environmental degradation.
The draft decision cites, to quote the decision, significant progress being made on climate change, water quality and sustainable fishing, all putting the reef on a stronger and more sustainable path. As the draft decision makes clear, Australia's environmental policies have fundamentally changed under the Labor government and have changed for the better.
This shows that the actions that we're taking as a government are being recognised by the international community as making a significant difference to the future of the reef. We don't need that listing to make us take the Great Barrier Reef seriously. No one takes protecting the reef more seriously than Australians do. And the action that's been taken by this government and the global recognition of that action shows that that's the case. We know that the reef has benefited from a couple of cooler, wetter years. We've seen really good hard coral cover more recently, but we're going again into a hotter, drier cycle. So we're very aware of that. That's why we need to help the reef build resilience. That's why we're improving water quality. It's why we're dealing with fishing to give the reef the best chance of coping with those hotter, drier times.
But climate activists do not support the UN's decision.
Well, I think it's naive to celebrate. We're having this conversation in a really timely manner whilst our northern hemisphere neighbors have been suffering heat waves and breaking hundreds of thousands of years temperature records. Bushfires have been plaguing the US, Canada, parts of Europe, and even here in northern Queensland, we've been experiencing heat wave conditions in the middle of our winter season. The unprecedented warm water conditions are quite worrisome moving into our summer season with a predicted El Nino cycle, and that's absolutely going to spell danger for the Great Barrier Reef. So we cannot afford to celebrate. It has not been listed as in danger as of yet. It's been delayed. But no matter what that announcement was going to be, regardless of an endangered listing outcome, the important, urgent conversation is regarding the severe threat that the Great Barrier Reef faces from accelerating climate change, and that this number one threat will remain if we don't double down on our efforts to reduce emissions this decade. So that's really where the conversation is right now, whether that listing is in danger or not. I think we have a real opportunity here to amplify the conversation about the effects of climate change, not just here in Australia, but worldwide. And we absolutely can make a difference. If we can do so to protect the Great Barrier Reef, that does send a message to the rest of the world that we are very serious and that the time is now.
The Great Barrier Reef may be getting some relief, but communities around Bolivia's Lake Titicaca are in for a dry spell. The country's National Naval Hydrographic Service issued a drought alert for the lake after the surface fell 2 centimeters below drought warning levels. This is just the beginning, according to the agency, of a serious situation for indigenous Aymara communities that rely on the tourist hotspot for their living. It's predicted the lake itself could reach historically low levels in the months to come.
En 3 meses ha bajado 30 centímetros y considerando que en esta época del año la radiación es mucho más fuerte, no hay aporte de agua ya de ninguna de las cuencas ni de la lluvia, se espera que siga reduciéndose en una magnitud similar, ¿no? Y es por eso que se ha emitido la alerta de sequía y las proyecciones que nos dicen que es probable que contemos con niveles mínimos bastante bajos, incluso extraordinarios, este año.
Tenemos pena nosotros que ya no va a llover, va a haber hambrón. De eso ya estamos teniendo nosotros pena, porque la agua está bajando más de 3 metros, de rincón estaba.
And that's it for this episode of Just 2 Degrees. We'll leave you with shots of British royalty serving up fast food for a good cause. Prince William served burgers from a food truck in South London to bring attention to 3 recent Earthshot Prize winners. The Prince founded the prize, first awarded in 2021, giving £1 million to winners to support their environmental work. The Earthshot Burger is a veggie burger that uses greenhouse-grown ingredients, is cooked using a portable stove fueled by biomass, and is served in biodegradable packaging made of seaweed and plant extracts. Until next time, bye.